Hi everyone, this is For the Love of Comics. This and much, much, much more is Love and Rockets. And today we're going to talk about what makes this such a terrific comic. But we're also going to talk about what makes this such a difficult comic for so many people to get into. And for those who are interested in checking out what the fuss is for themselves, I'll have a couple of curated picks to help you get started. Without further ado, let's jump into Love and Rockets. To the uninitiated, those who have read no Love and Rockets ever, I would say you're probably in one of two groups. Either you've never heard of this comic before, or you've heard about it in the context of being one of the greatest comics of all time, one of the finest comics of all time, someone's favorite comic of all time. And before we even get into what Love and Rockets is, this dichotomy of being either unknown or incredibly celebrated is a unique feature of this comic. I cannot think of anything that is as influential and as renowned, has such a superlative reputation on one hand, and yet continues to be, in some people's eyes, a severely underrated or unknown entity. The reverence and devotion that this comic elicits from some people would be intimidating if it were not for the fact that most people I know that love this comic do not find it easy to evangelize. Love and Rockets fans, I have found, will say it's a fantastic comic and it's a brilliant comic, but very seldom will they say, you are going to love it. You should absolutely stop what you're doing right now and read it. To me, this is the most direct presentation of that old chestnut of it's very difficult to tell you what it is. You sort of have to experience it for yourself. And while that may be true, I'll nevertheless attempt a little bit of a summary. Let's start simply and get more complicated as we go along. What is Love and Rockets? Love and Rockets is the name of a comic, but it is not a single story. Love and Rockets is a sort of banner or umbrella under which we get multiple stories, many of them in continuity with each other and many of them unconnected. As a series, it has been published in magazine, comics, and even a square-bound format for over 40 years, resulting in numerous trade, paperback, and hardcover collected editions, as well as omnibus and library editions. There are two main writer-artist creators at the center of Love and Rockets, brothers Gilbert Hernandez and Jaime Hernandez, but there is also a third brother, Mario, who's an occasional contributor and a significant and influential force in these comics getting started. Gilbert and Jaime, however, do not collaborate on their stories. Each issue of Love and Rockets has stories that are exclusively by Gilbert, written and drawn by him, and stories that are written and drawn by Jaime. In that way, every issue of Love and Rockets contains work by both brothers, including each one doing either the front or the back cover, and read as a two-author creator anthology. As I mentioned, some of these stories are one-offs and not in continuity, but large blocks of these stories for both Jaime and Gilbert are long-running, in-continuity stories with the same cast of characters, a cast of characters that continuously expands. Gilbert Hernandez's stories start off being set in a Central American town called Palomar and eventually move to the United States, whereas Jaime's stories are based in Southern California in the punk rock scene. Since 1982, Love and Rockets has been published in 4 volumes or series. Volume 1, or the first series, started being published in September 1982 with number 1 coming out from Fantagraphics, a sort of reprint and expansion of a self-published issue, and then all subsequent issues were brought out by Fantagraphics. From September 1982 all the way to April 1996, over 14 years, there would be 50 issues of this magazine-sized Love and Rockets published. Volume 2 started with issue number 1 in comic book size this time, with card covers starting in January of 2001. 20 issues of Volume 2 were published over the next 6 years until 2007. Then from 2008, Love and Rockets came back in a new format, a 100-page annual. This volume 3 or series 3 is called Love and Rockets The New Stories, presented in a new square-bound format. 800-page annual issues of the third series were published all the way till 2016. And in 2016, Love and Rockets went back to its original magazine format coming back with issue 1 of series 4, the latest issue of which, number 14, came out in May 2024. Now, I'm not going to get into the publication and collection details of each of these series. That's for a follow-up video, a much longer, exhaustive, and possibly exhausting video that will be coming up very soon. So there you have a most rudimentary summary of what Love and Rockets is. A long-running American comic book series featuring the auteur and independent works of two brothers, each of whom have created over the years hundreds and thousands of story pages featuring both in-continuity epic narratives as well as singular and standalone comics works. And while that summary kind of may say what Love and Rockets is, it in no way prepares us for what makes it so great. And this is the part of the video that I was really afraid of. How do I describe why I think this comic is so great? Because there's no dearth of praise and academic scholarship out there on Love and Rockets. The best simple way that I've heard Love and Rockets described is it's the quintessential your favorite band's favorite band. Given when it started, given its longevity, given its approach to pure maverick independent comic storytelling that is nonetheless completely rooted in the form of comics, in the history and the stylings that have come before it, in order to not reinvent but to expand the boundaries of what comic storytelling can do. In all of these ways, Love and Rockets is unlike anything else. But its historical significance shouldn't sell short its monumental artistic achievements that continue to this day. There are very few years in the last 40 that you wouldn't have had at least a couple of new Love and Rockets or related stories come out. Alongside this consistency has been this phenomenal evolution in the style and the narratives that these two brothers use for their stories. This is most obviously evident in the fact that their characters age in quote-unquote real time. Every issue that has been published over the years has depicted its characters, the ones that recur, sort of contemporaneously. At the same time, both the worlds of Gilbert and Jaime have flashbacks built into them. So we revisit times when the characters were younger and we recognize them from older stories, the stories in which they were actually that age. But the aging of these characters is something that we can only appreciate when the body of work is looked at the same time. Individual stories always have this moment-by-moment immediacy that connects the reader to the character in a way that I find truly unique and remarkable. Because the stories in these comics are not stories in the most traditional or expected sense. They can be absurd with fantastical and even science fiction trappings bleeding in and out of an otherwise psychologically realistic picture. You can think large swaths of these stories are slice of life vignettes, but at the same time you have an infusion of everything from Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko comics and Mexican telenovelas, pro wrestling. Archie comics are a big influence, but not as references or homages. There's a deeper understanding that both the brothers employ when it comes to timing and pacing, when it comes to the expression of emotion, when it comes to the cadence of banter and conversation. You can see in these stories a complete swallowing of comics as a form of entertainment and of storytelling, and then coming out as something different, unique, yet recognizable. Whether it is the Palomar set stories or the characters that come from those stories of Gilbert Hernandez, or the Locas, the Barrio and the Oxnard, California set stories of punk rock girls and their lives by Jaime. Those stories in their very different ways feel like windows into lives that we are peering through in a way that feels absolutely authentic and genuine. Irrespective of what you think about the characters, if you're irritated with them, if you're angry with them, if you're confused about why they do things, you're thinking about them as real people. And the reason I believe that these comics achieve that kind of connection is because none of the characters in none of the stories care that the reader exists. They're living their lives, and their lives are so full of detail. It's so rich. It's so conflicted, and it's depicted with such disarming honesty. It can be sort of overwhelming. I think we're so used to, as readers, having things picked and chosen for us. Either they fit a particular structure that we're expecting, or they slot into expectations we already have. If looked at from that point of view, the stories in Love and Rockets would be all subversion. But of course, it's not a subversion of comic storytelling, it's an acceleration of it, it's a distillation of it. As the years go by, you get 100 different windows into 100 different moments, and no one would really say nothing happens in these stories. There are monumental events and soap opera, melodrama, twists and turns that are straight out of B movie, in fact, Z movie or Z movie level stories, pulp and noir and horror, science fiction. There are things happening all the time, but very often the big ridiculous thing might be in the background, where you get a small character moment instead for page after page and a major event in just a couple of panels. You have shifts in time and location that aren't explained to readers. You don't have captions and explainers. You don't have placeholders, which is another reason why I think this comic might be so hard for people to get into. If they pick up a volume or any random issue, they might say, I have no idea who these people are. I have no idea what's going on. I guess I have to read every single thing in continuity in order for any of this to make sense. And that's where I would say I completely understand it, but to a certain extent, I don't think that's the point of Love and Rockets. I think the series, whether you're looking at Gilbert's stories or Jaime's stories, I think the series of comics is a document of lives. It's a document of moments, but it's also a document of momentous occasions. The characters are so incredibly detailed, so fully formed, that it's the accumulation of all these glimpses we get of them through the years that makes us have that connection. So the big issues with people trying out Love and Rockets is this notion of how many comics there are out there and how odd they are and how absurd they are, how experimental they are, how they do not hold on to any one thing that you thought that would be about, how they slip back and forth, not just in time and character focus, but also in genre and tonality sometimes. It can feel like whiplash, it can feel intimidating, and it can leave a new reader at a loss. Even I, as an avowed fan of this series, would not say that I have enjoyed and loved every single thing in it equally. That's impossible given the volume of work out there, given the range of these writer artists, and given their ambition and experimentation. I will say, however, that every little piece, whether I liked it or not, whether I enjoyed it or not, felt unique and strange and visceral and observed and portrayed with a level of passion and with a level of completeness that I find extremely rare. There really is no such thing as a thing that will be beloved by everyone. And I think particularly when we get to the boldest and the bravest and the most experimental and the most unique things that have really engaged people at a gut level, you may very easily have the opposite. You may very easily have it be disconnected from others. But Love and Rockets is not just an alt comics or underground comics. It's more than that, because it defiantly ignores any classification of comics that might exist and creates a niche of one, of where Love and Rockets is like Love and Rockets. It's like nothing else in the world. As I mentioned, I will do a longer video in which we look at a number of different issues and how they've been collected over the years. And I might even offer a couple of opinions at that point about various storylines. But for now, if you're interested in checking out Love and Rockets, I've got a couple of suggestions for you. There are myriad forms, editions, collections out there. Many of them are out of print, hard to find, and expensive, as well as a new box set that's phenomenal, and I will talk about in a different video. But for now, I want to focus on bite-sized things that are easy to pick up and affordable, and will give you an idea of whether or not you want to dive further. Over here, I'm going to focus on the Palomar stories by Gilbert Hernandez and the Loca stories by Jaime, the brothers' respective long-running in-continuity epic worlds. With long-running in-continuity series, the question always is, do I have to start from the beginning, or can I read something later? So I'll give you a couple from the beginning and a couple from later. The Love and Rockets library, the mass market paperbacks that Fantagraphics has been collecting, put together the works of the brothers separately, individually and chronologically as far as their stories are concerned, and not have them collected together the way they came out in issues. And it's not hard to see why that's a good way of doing the editions. I would strongly recommend picking up Heartbreak Soup to check out the stories of Gilbert Hernandez, but I think it's a fantastic start and it'll give you a very good sense of Gilbert Hernandez's style and interests. Of course, he does go on to become more experimental and more out there, for lack of a better phrase. And if this doesn't appeal to you, maybe that later stuff will. But if this does appeal to you, I think you'll be primed to see this evolution. And the evolution of the story happens almost immediately with the second volume of Palomar stories. That's Human Diastrophism. These two books put back to back provide enough, I believe, of a roller coaster and a comprehensive view of characters and storytelling styles and tone. And reading these two books, either back to back or with something in between them, is my recommendation if you want to try out Gilbert Hernandez's Love and Rockets stuff. While Gilbert's stories are strong and fully formed from the very beginning, while they expand in ambition and style later, they're always recognizable from this. Jaime's stories are quite different. His very first volume, Maggie the Mechanic, collecting the earliest of his stories, aren't a fair indication of where his stories would go, although there would always be elements of those early stories in his later work. Instead, I think over here, starting with the second volume of Jaime's stories, The Girl from Hoppers, might be the more suitable volume to start with for contemporary readers. The Girl from Hoppers can be immediately followed up with Perla la Loca, or you could go Heartbreak Soup, The Girl from Hoppers, Human Diastrophism, and Perla la Loca. And I think that's a good foundational start on Love and Rockets, even though it's not purely chronological, even though it's missing a couple of things because of the way the stories are being put together. And those are things that I think scholars and fans and people who wish to do comparative things might want to argue about. And if you become a fan, you can enter into that. But to start with, I think these are the photos. However, if you want something that is not from the 80s and the 90s and something more contemporary, probably the most recommended of the contemporary works would be the Jaime book, The Love Bunglers. The Love Bunglers is a two-part story that came out in the new stories in volume 3 and volume 4. And I completely agree that this is a great encapsulation of what makes this writer-artist such a unique force. The only thing is that I do think that long-time readers understand this story a little bit better because of the 30, 40 years that have come before this. It does seem as a sort of culmination and ending, although it isn't. Of course, the stories of these characters continue in Love and Rockets, the series, but as an encapsulation and as a sort of climax, it's one of those rare things in a series that's known for its more vignette and non-traditional approach to storytelling. That's also the reason why it's such an accessible recommendation for new readers. And I recommend it fully as well. But there's always going to be that part who says that, no, read all 20 years that came before this for you to fully get the power of what this achieves. If you wish to go in a completely different direction from that, check out a book like Dix and Dee Dee's, which is absurdist and hallucinatory and very bizarre in a way that Gilbert Hernandez also does with his work, with characters that you know from the more realistic and gritty world. It's that combination of gritty and fantastical that Love and Rockets does in a way that nothing else does, not just in comics. And any of these collections will give you a sense, at the very least, of just how different and how odd and how endearing this comic can be. For Gilbert stories post Palomar, Julio's Day and Children of Palomar are two of my personal favorites. Love and Rockets is not an easy sell. You may dismiss Love and Rockets as a purely art or intellectual comic, which honestly wouldn't make a lot of sense. Given its enduring popularity and given its incredible appeal to people who see themselves and friends of theirs reflected in it, it's obviously got a level of authenticity and a level of observation observation, absurdist or otherwise, that connects. And for me, sitting in New Delhi, India, as far away from the Oxnard punk rock scene of the late 70s or early 80s, or the sleepy South American, Central American hamlets that these stories are about, who's never watched any episode of a Mexican TV soap opera in his life. For me, it's the authenticity, the care, the craft, the slyness of observation, the empathy for all kinds of humanity that make this comic, whether they are the stories by Gilbert Hernandez or by Jaime Hernandez, that make them so fantastic. Of course, this is just my opinion on what I think of as one of the most celebrated, most renowned, most appreciated, but also most dismissed or most ignored masterpieces of all time. It's not a single work, it's not a single universe or a world. Love and Rockets for me is a term that encompasses so many facets that come together as a singular jewel of comics. Over the years, I've put together a motley collection of Love and Rockets issues and editions, and in my next video, I'm going to do a deeper dive into what was published when and what's collected in what, as far as I can manage it. If you're not subscribed and would like to know when that happens, there's just no way you can do that. I'm sorry. If you enjoyed this video, leave me a like. I'd like to thank my patrons and channel members who voted on Love and Rockets to be the next subject for one of my videos. And of course, it's going to be more than one. If you'd like to support this channel the way these fine people do, check out Patreon or YouTube memberships. This has been For the Love of Comics, talking about Love and Rockets. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.